Into the Spiderverse came out in 2018, so if you're watching this video and you haven't seen the movie yet, what are you doing? Press pause on this video and go watch the movie because I'm about to spoil it, and honestly, it is a movie worth experiencing yourself. Unless you're one of the teachers grading this assignment, then please stay on this video. I would like a good grade. Anyways, if you clicked on this video, you're probably a fan of Spider-Man, or a fan of unique animation styles. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse caters to both of these audiences. In this movie, multiple different universes crash into one and bring their respective Spider-Person and animation style with them. If you haven't seen the movie yet, Miles Morales is the main character. He witnesses the death of his universe's Spider-Man, Peter Parker. Shortly after that, he gets bitten by a glitchy-looking spider, leading him to develop all the powers that come with being Spider-Man. Super hearing, the spider sense reflexes, and sticky hands. Later in the movie, after Miles meets the spider people of the different universes, they try to teach him how to be just like them. Having so many people tell him what to do and how to act, Miles' biggest struggle in this movie is finding himself and being true to himself no matter what everyone else says. And that's where the beauty of Into the Spider-Verse comes from. The writing for this movie is absolutely wonderful, but the most important thing is that the animation is used to visually tell the story as well. The animation style for this film takes inspiration from the look of comic books and mixes it with realism. For some context, there's this thing called the Super Collider. It was made for the big bad of this movie, Kingpin. His super objective is to open a portal to a different universe using the Super Collider in hopes of finding a universe where his wife and kid are still alive. However, when he tests the Super Collider, it isn't stable enough for proper use, so it brings 5 different Spider-Men and women to his universe. With each Spider-Person coming from a different universe, they bring their own animation style that mixes with the comic book realism mashup of the film. The 5 Spider people that are brought into Miles and Kingpin's universe are Peter Parker, or Spider-Man, whose animation style is very similar to that of Miles' world. Gwen Stacy, or Ghost Spider, whose animation style is fluid and matches the watercolor world she comes from. Peter Porker, or Spider-Ham, whose animation style resembles that of a Looney Tunes cartoon, with him pulling hammers out of seemingly nowhere. Spider-Man Noir, or Peter Parker, whose animation style mimics that of old noir films. And Penny Parker, or Spider, who has a manga and anime animation style. With each character coming from a different universe, they bring a part of their art style and reality with them. Each character is animated in accordance to the reality of their universe. With all this talk of realism and reality, we must ask the question, what is realism in animation? You might be thinking to yourself, well, isn't realism just when something looks real? No. Okay, well, you're not entirely wrong, but in order to clarify, we need to look into film theory. Not that film theory. According to André Bazin's Ontology of the Photographic Image, realism is achieved through the camera where no human hand interferes with the physical recording of the world onto film. This pretty much means that realism in film has to be made without any influence from anyone. For example, let's say I want to drink some water. Realism would say that I will be recorded drinking an actual glass of water, like this. But let's say I don't have a glass of water, so I edit one in. This wouldn't count as realism because I'm changing what happened in the real world as of recording the clip and adding something in afterwards. Although Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse does its best to recreate the look of the real world, it isn't a fully realist film. If it isn't a real movie, then what is it? Because, I mean, it looks real. Okay, hold your horses and listen to me because I'm about to break this down. In film theory, there's this thing called the Formalist Realist Scale. Taking a look at an academic article from the City University of New York titled The Formalist Realist Scale, we can determine that the differences between formalism and realism are as follows. When we look at formalism in film, we see that the beauty or power of the image is primary, displacing a sense of reality. Visual presentation is stylized. Films represent extraordinary characters and events, and genres are almost always musicals, sci-fi, horror/suspense, or fantasy. Taking a look at realism in film, we see that it creates the illusion of reality, with no changes or manipulation of everyday life. The director tries to show the surface of life as closely as possible, so the viewer accepts the film as a reflection of reality. And the center of the story is primary importance, rather than technique or expression. If we take just one look at different stills of the movie, we know that it is hyper-stylized, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's strictly formalist. Yes, the film has a focus on the visual aspect and has extraordinary characters and events, but it tells a story that is directly tied to the visual animation of the movie and its characters. There's a large focus on the narrative, which falls into the realism category, but the film's focus on the style of visuals falls into the formalism category. So on the scale of formalism to realism, Into the Spiderverse is probably around the middle. But there's one thing we're forgetting. Spiderverse is an entirely animated film, and in realism, there can't be any influence or interference in the recording of everyday life. And you can't exactly record an everyday life movie about animated characters. So how does Into the Spider-Verse even remotely be considered as a realist movie? Well, if we take a look at Stephen Prince's correspondence-based theory of realism, it pretty much says that digital imaging can create photorealist images of the unphotographable, making reality become anything that is perceived as real according to the laws of our world. So although the movie is completely animated, it can mimic reality by having characters and scenery that look like something from the real world. Well, for something unreal to look real, there has to be a set of rules or guidelines put in place that adhere to the rules of the real world. As long as an animated character follows the rules set by the real world that determine how a real person would behave and act, then the animated character will look real. Now, as mentioned earlier, the art style of the film draws inspiration from comic books and mixes it with realism. This makes the hyper-stylized nature of the film. Into the Spider-Verse takes elements of comic books and implements them into film. One of the comic book features the film uses is the visual representation of action words or sounds, like onomatopoeias. Where comic books use boom or pow, Into the Spider-Verse uses thwip as Spider-Man swings through the trees. One conversion that is quite difficult, however, is the implementation of comic book panels in film. When you're reading a comic book, you can always stop and reread each panel to give it its meaning. But you can't exactly pause the film at every frame to read each comic panel. Because of this, it is difficult to put comic panels in film. But Into the Spider-Verse finds a clever way to do this. In the scene after Miles gets bit by the spider and develops his spider sense, the film uses multiple different panels on screen that layer different sounds and conversations to show the audience just how much more Miles is aware of his surroundings now. More and more panels keep getting added, showing that Miles is starting to get stressed with all of this new information, and then all of the people in the panel start talking at the same time, showing us just how overwhelmed Miles is getting with all of the noise. Oh boy, I wish I could. You get the idea. Moving back to the idea of animation styles, although the movie implements many of them from having multiple universes crash together, there is still one consistent animation style. That's the one that we've been talking about, the one that takes inspiration from old hand-drawn comics. The film uses offsets instead of blurs in some scenes to mimic the comic book art style. Backgrounds are filled with offset halftone dots in order to indicate shadows. So let's just say I'm standing, and in the background you can see my neighborhood. The comic book style used by the film would make the background a little more bright and colorful. Then use the offset halftone dots to fill in the background and shade in the shadows. Another tactic used is blurred motion frames. Let's say we take a clip of me throwing a punch. If we pause right at the middle of the motion, there is no blur. I'm just a stable shape of a person. However, if we were to take the same clip of an animated character using the style of the film, there would be what we call a motion blur. Here I'm using the same clip of me, but edited to look like something you would see in the movie. The arm that is swinging forward to throw the punch is blurred to emphasize the motion. Some more comic book elements used by Into the Spider-Verse are the dots absolutely everywhere. The two types of dots used by the film are Kirby dots and halftone dots. Kirby dots look like this, and halftone dots look like this. The Kirby dots are used to show energy crackles of the super collider, the particles of spray paint, and they are used when Miles uses his invisibility powers. The halftone dots are literally everywhere. They're used in the background of every scene and are used to shade in shadows of the characters. In this movie, Kirby dots are used to represent Miles and his expression of himself and reality. More importantly, the dots can be used to show Miles' journey in finding his place in his own reality. These dots are used when the super collider is used, when Miles uses spray paint to express himself, and when Miles uses his invisibility powers. The Kirby dots used to express his journey through the movie are used visually to tie into the narrative, once again showing us how the film uses aspects of both formalism and realism. Spider-Verse also plays with size and space. Remember how a couple of minutes ago we were talking about Kingpin and how he's the big bad villain of this movie? Well, the film shows this to us visually. Kingpin is a large character. He towers over all the other characters, and there is literally a scene where his face and body take up the entire frame. This way, the film conveys to us visually that Kingpin is a big character in the film. Another usage of size is when Miles is swinging through the trees outside of Alchemax. These trees are scaled up to be way bigger than any other tree in the film. This helps us understand Miles' fear as he swings through the big trees. As he comes into his role as being the next Spider-Man of his world, he is realizing just how much weight is on his shoulders. These large trees that he swings through help us understand that he feels the world is bigger now, that he has to save it. In the world of animation, there are these things called frames. Each frame is pretty much a drawing, and when you put multiple frames next to each other and play them quick enough, it makes them look like the drawings are moving. This is a very basic explanation of animation. For most of the movie, Miles is animated on twos, meaning that he changes position every other frame instead of every single frame. This helps us see his clunkiness as he struggles to become Spider-Man at first. In order to reach his full potential, Miles had to become himself, not the person everyone else wanted him to be. Miles is able to use his invisibility ability and becomes sure of himself, and when Miles makes and decorates a suit, he uses spray paint to do so. Both of these activities use Kirby dots to symbolize that Miles is coming into his own and being secure in his own reality. Near the end of the movie, Miles takes his literal and symbolic leap of faith. He literally jumps off a building, and this symbolizes that he is finally secure enough in himself to catch himself when he needs to. As he falls downward, the camera angle reorients itself to show him rising upward. The leap of faith is the moment of the film, even being used in the promo posters. This is his moment. He is finally secure of himself. He is the center of the frame. He has become Spider-Man. As Miles falls, the scene gives a sense of stillness, like an individual comic panel. Miles is taking this moment to be calm, regardless of the excitement in the film. Then he starts to fall faster and faster. The camera reorients itself to show Miles falling downward, and multiple comic panels are seen to show that Miles is falling faster and faster. Multiple speed lines can be shown, and each comic panel zooms in closer and closer to his face. And then he swings through the city. In this scene, and the rest of the movie, Miles is finally animated on ones. Miles is moving with the rest of the world, and at this point, Miles is completely in tune with himself, and he is integrating himself into reality on a narrative and visual level. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse pushed past the boundaries of the formalist to realist scale, making us see that movies can use both ends of the scale to make an effective story. The animation in Spider-Verse isn't just cool to look at, but it heightens the emotional impact of the narrative. I just want to give a huge thanks to anyone who made it to this part of the video. Just for some context, this video was an assignment for my dual enrollment English class. We had to take an expert text and transform it into a different multimodal genre, analyzing the rhetorical features and information used in the expert text and my multimodal genre. I chose to make this video, and I based it off of the expert text by Sophie Barber, Into the Spiderverse and A New Age of Comic Realism. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.